This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, well, it looks like Disney finally got the message about going woke and the consequences. You need proof? Well, we've got it coming up in a moment. We also speak to author and columnist Jon Gabriel about his new book, Sink the Rising Sun. I love Jon Gabriel's columns. His op-eds have been brilliant over the years. He is center-right and absolutely sane. I love that about him. But who knew he had a great book in him, and who knew the subject matter and how it connects with his very curious past? And we take a look at Zachary Levi. Yes, the actor embraced Trump recently, said it was career suicide. Certainly not the case yet, but there is a sign that it could be on the way. We'll explain.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
Well, when we talk about woke Hollywood or write a book like I did about the subject, we often go back to Disney. Of course, Disney's the beloved brand known for generations, creating all this great content for kids and grandparents, for people of all ages. They've done it just so long, a bulletproof brand, and they threw much of that away by going woke, by delivering lectures, by disconnecting with much of the American public. You know, we've seen this all in the recent past, movies like Lightyear, TV shows that bring up issues and subjects that are wildly inappropriate for young viewers. Well, I think they may have gotten the message. Now, let's flash back to 2023, and Disney was having a terrible, awful, no good year. Movies like Haunted Mansion and The Marvels just absolutely flatlined at the box office. Real big busts. They lost millions and millions of dollars. Now, in 2024, it's a completely different situation. Inside Out 2 came out earlier this summer, a huge hit, more than $600 million. That's just in the US alone. Massive, massive success. They've also had Moana 2, which is currently in theaters and crushing it at the box office as well. That one was actually meant for streaming, and they said, hey, maybe we should put it in theaters. Well, pretty smart move. It's a smash. And then, of course, Deadpool and Wolverine. Everyone saw it. Everyone loved it. Silly, goofy, certainly self-aware about many things in Disney and outside the industry, and especially poking fun of the MCU.
My name is Deadpool, and I'm an X-Man.
Trainee!
Shut it!
What do these three recent films have in common besides their runaway success? Well, they're not woke. They're not filled with lectures. It's all about entertainment. It's about delivering charming characters, funny scenes, heartwarming moments. That's what they have in common, and that's why they're just doing great box office right now. So you could look at that and say, well, maybe Disney's starting to get the lesson. Maybe they're realizing that if they go back to their old ways, just being entertaining, giving out fun, family-friendly movies and TV shows, they could recapture that spark. And I think they're doing that right now. But let's dial back a little bit and say, how did this happen? Well, last year, Disney's CEO, Bob Iger, mentioned what was going on with the company and how the future would be playing out. He said he wanted to quiet the noise on the culture war front, meaning he wanted to step back and maybe be less didactic with its programming. And of course, many people were thinking, yeah, what took you so long, Bob? That's what we've been waiting for. We still love Disney. We just like the old Disney. But would he be true to his word? Would the content coming out of the Disney pipeline, would it reflect these new values? And, listen, it takes time. There's many things that are in the works. A movie doesn't get thought of today and come out in theaters tomorrow. There's a time or two. It could be a multi-year process. But recently, we've seen a couple of things that suggest that, yeah, Bob Iger's message is getting through. And we'll look at specifically Inside Out 2, which, according to a leak a few months ago, was supposed to be more progressive. There was more ideology built into that story involving some of the female characters. Well, turns out they scotched those plans. They didn't make the final cut. And of course, the movie went on to be a mega success. Cause and effect? You make the call. But more recently, Disney Plus was talking about a new TV show from the Pixar company, which is part of their division. It's called Win or Lose, and it's a story about a co-ed softball team at a middle school. And that show, I believe, is going to be airing in February, so pretty soon. And there was a trans character as part of the storyline. Well, turns out the trans character has hit the editing room floor. We will not be seeing that character in the movie. But I want to read you specifically what Disney said regarding that decision, why they made it, and what their public statement was about it. Here it is. When it comes to animated content for a younger audience, we recognize that many parents would prefer to discuss certain subjects with their children on their terms and timeline. Well, that's what parents have been telling Disney, almost shouting to Disney for a very long time. Now, the Mouse House is listening. And of course, the big question is why, and why now? Well, look at 2023 and then look at 2024. There's been a big difference in the box office results for Disney. But let's take a quick step back here. But recently there was a story in the New York Times by a filmmaker. It was an op-ed, but it was in that publication, which is obviously far left, basically saying that the era of woke movies is done, kaput, it's over. And it wasn't a very good era to begin with. It was full of lectures. It didn't really connect with audiences. And as a matter of fact, it's already aging badly. And it just wrapped, at least according to the article. You have to read it all. It's a fascinating expose of what's going on within Hollywood. I've been saying this for months, if not years. People like the Critical Drinker, Film Threat, other film analysts like Sasha Stone, they've been warning about this forever. This is wrong. This isn't creative. This new woke era of storytelling is problematic, to use the phraseology of the woke left. But no one seemed to listen. Hollywood didn't listen. Well, now Disney is listening. They are course correcting. We'll have to see if it's permanent or just a temporary situation. But to see it in the pages of the New York Times, it was just flabbergasting to me. And one other quick note about that article, it also mentions that, it doesn't mention them directly, but it says that film critics were grading these movies on a curve. They actually weren't as good as we said they were, at least according to the author of the article, and that should stop as well. Now, that one rang a bell with me for many reasons, but it also made me remember a comment from Richard Roeper, who's one of the more famous critics in the country. He was paired with Roger Ebert for a while after Gene Siskel's passing. And what was interesting about that was that Richard Roeper called out his fellow critics way back in 2016 when they gave mostly favorable reviews to Ghostbusters. Now, that is the infamous Lady Ghostbusters film. It rebooted the beloved comedy with 4 female actresses instead of 4 male stars. It became a cultural war touchpoint for sure. Critic Richard Roeper said that his fellow critics graded the movie on a curve. They wanted to like it. They wanted to push forward the message of we need more female empowerment at the cinema. And thus, we have to give this a better review than it needs or than it deserves. It didn't get a lot of attention at the time. I certainly waved my hand and published it at hollywoodintoto.com. But it did come back to me as I read that op-ed from the New York Times. So speaking of the times, they are a-changing. Disney is finally waking up. I think they've realized they can make much, much more money and entertain everyone by being less woke, less filled with lectures. They're also more willing to understand the audience that they're serving. Generations of people love the Disney product. They want to continue to do that. They want to pass it on to their children and grandchildren. And you leave the messages out, you leave the hectoring out, well, they'll do just that. And I think Disney's finally seen the light. But I think the bigger question is, has Hollywood? Will other studios follow suit? Will they drop this woke agenda? I think it remains to be seen. But I will say, they're already talking about a Barbie sequel, and that's not a positive sign. Not that you shouldn't make a sequel to a beloved and very popular film, but that movie was pretty darn woke. So any kind of sequel you think would also be woke as possible. We'll have to wait and see, but the bottom line is, if you don't go woke, I think you're going to make more money. And Hollywood, at the end of the day, finally, is all about the bottom line. When it comes to conservative commentators, there are different categories for me. There are people who are pure red meat and inspired. I think about Dan Bongino. He's just as good as it gets, but he is overtly partisan. He is right of center. I think he's brilliant. I think he's full of energy and moxie. I love the fact that he's from New York like I am. I always identify with that. But, he delivers a very specific product and it's great, but it is what it is. Other people, like Carol Markowitz, they are right of center columnists, but they are trying to reach the center at times. They're very sober, very thoughtful, very understanding of the other side as well. And I do appreciate that. And I think that columnist Jon Gabriel falls squarely into the latter category. He's good, he's smart, he's thoughtful, but I don't think he's the kind of writer who pushes away people on the left and center left. He's just not that guy. And I've always appreciated his points of view, in part because I think he's going to expand the tent on the right. He's going to reach out to people who may be unwilling to hear a Dan Bongino as good as he is and as wonderful and insightful as he is. I think maybe his brash persona may push away some people. Well, Jon is different. And it's why I've been following him for years. He's the kind of columnist that even if you don't agree with him, you respect his point of view. So when I heard he was putting out a novel, I thought, oh, that's going to be interesting at the very least. And it's actually a lot more than that. It's called Sink the Rising Sun. It's set in the 1940s in World War II, and it's set around Australia. And it follows a submarine commander who is new to the gig and is being called to duty at the most perilous of times because the Axis powers are on the march and the good guys, well, they've taken it on the chin a time or two. And when I was reading up about the book and about Jon's connection to it, I didn't realize that, well, this is part of his background. As a matter of fact, when I read his bio attached to the book, it said that he was a former submarine officer. And I thought, that Jon, he's so droll. He's adding this sort of quirky bit into his resume, kind of like a little elbow, a little nudge into for people who have been following him for years because he's just got that sense of humor. Nope, that's part of his background. And he's going to get into that more in our conversation. He really was on a submarine. It really was part of his past. And of course, it helped inspire the book, Sink the Rising Sun. Well, we get into more about that, his background, why he wrote this book, some of the research behind the scenes, and also what he thinks about pop culture in general moving into 2025. He's always been a very thoughtful commentator, as I mentioned before. And while he's not directly involved in Hollywood, he understands the pop culture realm better than most. So I wanted to pick his brain on that subject too. So hope you enjoy the conversation. I believe this is his first time on the show. Welcome, Jon Gabriel, author of Sink the Rising Sun, a smart, engaging columnist, and turns out pretty darn good novelist too. Hope you enjoy this. Well, Jon, thanks for joining the show. Now, I know you've got a droll sense of humor. So when I first started looking into your new book, Sink the Rising Sun, and saw that you were a submarine operator, I thought, that Jon, he's such a character. Just another little puckish bit to throw our way. And no, that's actually your background. So just tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll obviously launch into the book.
Well, as you note, I'm a famed war hero. Because right out of high school, I talked my buddy into joining the Navy, and I ended up being a nuclear reactor operator aboard a Los Angeles class sub out of Pearl Harbor. So that definitely, sticks with one. When I first joined, I decided, okay, I'm going to make a career of this and become an officer, become a world famous admiral. And then after about 10 days on the submarine, I'm like, I miss seeing the sun every once in a while. That was nice. So did my one tour of duty. And but after doing that, with the training period and with the submarine itself, it was everything after that was incredibly easy, time-wise and everything.
I, in a way, stumbled into my career as a writer. I went to art school forever. I've got 3 degrees I don't use. Was writing something that was always top of mind for you, even back in those early days, or how did you develop into a writer?
It's kind of odd, but I ran away from running most of my life because I'm like, oh, it's not going to pay enough. So after I graduated college, I made money on the side. Basically, my beer budget was from graphic design. So I started doing that and found out quickly that marketing pays more than journalism, especially as when I was graduating.
What does it?
Yeah, when I was graduating, the internet was out now. It was a new thing, at least as a popular form of communication. And I was like, okay, I'll stick with marketing and graphic design. But every job I had, the executives would find out I could write. And then I was writing letters to congressmen. I was, writing memos to staff. So every job I ended up being the writer on staff. So finally I made it official. I was with the Goldwater Institute, a state-based think tank here in Arizona. And after that, I went freelance writing. And again, I thought marketing would pay more, but people just kept saying yes to the writing part of it. So it just took over everything else.
Gotcha. Now, along this whole journey, you've been doing this for a while now. Were you a frustrated novelist? You thought, I do want to write that first novel, or was this something that kind of came organically a little bit later?
Pretty organically. I always thought I had a book of some type in me. And over the summer, well, really the past few years, I've been doing a lot more reading. And I went through the Master and Commander series of books by Patrick O'Brian. There's the great movie, of course, that everybody loves. And after reading through that, I thought, what about setting this instead of in 1805, set it in 1941? And I knew submarines, and I've also read a tremendous amount about the Pacific War, about the submarine war. There's actually a lot of personal retellings of people's experience, from major figures to the torpedo guy, kind of sweating in his bunk there. So I thought, what if I could do that kind of Master and Commander type of thing, but for World War II submarines? And I chose World War II submarines. Another movie everyone loves is The Hunt for Red October. I was on a nuclear sub, but when you read about the World War II experience, they were on surface most of the time. They would even get in hand-to-hand combat sometimes. They would go on rescue missions. So it's just a lot more active, whereas nuke sub warfare is very kind of psychological. And I thought it would be fun. Just the diversity of encounters that they had in World War II would be interesting.
Now, when you think about your experiences, they're of a certain era, and obviously this is early 1940s. So a lot of the real life research you went through didn't really apply here. Was this an exhaustive deep dive into research? Is this something you've kind of done on the side because it's such a topic of interest to you? How did you do that? And also, what were the more curious places where you did your research, as far as platforms or media or anything like that?
Right. Books are the main thing. And I do a lot of reading anyway. I have, like many writers, I don't get to sleep until way too late. So when I'm up late and it's quiet, I just read and read and read. And I went through this exhaustive deep dive through the Pacific War, through submarines. And so that's where I got the base knowledge for these things. But also reading about, you can find newspapers from the era. And the American ones, they're very far off. This story starts in something that I didn't know about until about 2 years ago, which was how much presence U.S. submarines had in Australia. Because everything else had fallen, and they weren't talked about much at the time because the submarine force was just like, please don't mention us. We don't want attention. But they operated lots of submarines out of various ports in Australia, and that's where this story begins. But by the end, submarines made up 2% of the U.S. Navy. They sunk 60% of all Japanese shipping. So they also, on the flip side, had the highest death percentage for any service in all of World War II. So it was very dicey business. But and really, too, they were trying to figure out submarine tactics on the fly. Technology was changing, and no one knew how these things worked in the real world.
Now, given all that research, I imagine when you look into one topic, research a particular part of the saga, it gives you plot ideas. Do you find that happening where, I could use this, I could use that? Does that help shape the story along the way, or did you have sort of a real through line kind of set in mind already?
I really just started writing. I was going to sleep one night. I thought of a scene in my head. I fell asleep. The next day I wrote 2,000 words, and that was basically chapter 1. So that was the start. And it really had nothing to do with submarines, because one thing I love about the Master and Commander books, when you're in the Navy, half of your life is at sea. You can have the exciting adventures and sea battles and things like that, but at least half of your time is on land, dealing with Navy politics, dealing with relationships, and just the day-to-day stuff you got to get done. So I really wanted to capture that part of it, because most of the novels I've read about the period are just kind of go, go, go.
Mhm.
And I'm like, that's not how the Navy works. On a submarine, it's 50-day patrol usually, and then about 3 weeks break, and then another 50 days. Well, a lot happens during those 3 weeks as well. So I wanted to capture the whole person and have real characters. And that's one thing I loved about the Patrick O'Brian books about Jack Aubrey and Stephen Maturin is, and I did steal this from that book, is they're very effective and amazing and cool and awesome at sea. Then they get on land and they're like, I don't know how to do any of this stuff. How do I ask a girl out on a date? How do I
Oh,
balance my checkbook? I don't know how anything works out here. And it made a very fun dynamic where they're not these kind of superheroes, but they're like, look, they're really good at this one thing. Everything else, they're goofballs like the rest of us.
yeah. Yeah, we're losing the greatest generation. Obviously, Father Time remains undefeated. Did you get a chance to maybe run this past anyone who was from that era at all? I don't know if that's even possible on a lot of different levels, but I was just kind of curious if that was maybe
No,
part
I
of your
didn't
research.
do that, but thankfully I've had the chance to speak with people who were on those old diesel submarines.
Uh-huh.
When I was in Pearl Harbor, near it, there's the USS Bowfin, which is one of these submarines very similar to the one that I talk about in the book. And there were a lot of crusty old dudes around there. And I'm a complete introvert, except when I see an old guy wearing a blue service cap, and then I'm like, tell me everything you know. So
Spare no
you
details.
can meet fascinating people that way. And now, yeah, it's very, very rare to see anyone with World War II background, but you'll still see them with Korea, with Vietnam, with
Yeah.
Iraq and all that. So I always try to chat them up and interrupt their shopping, basically, so I can glean info from them.
My friend John Nolte wrote a book, a wonderful book, Borrowed Time, and he's been insisting forever, even though it's a wonderful read. He's a one and done when it comes to books. Did you find yourself like, this is too much work, I don't want to do it again? Or you're thinking, oh gosh, I think I've got a new career path here. How did you emerge from this?
I thought it was fun, which shocked me. One thing, when you're writing something for the web, I'm writing an article for a magazine, whatever, the way that I write, the way that my brain works is I write 3 sentences, then I stop, then I Google something, then I check a stat, then I make sure the percentage is correct, then I do a little math and say, okay, I trust the source. Now let's keep writing. So there's a lot of just stop and start when I write those. And for the book, for the most part, it was very fun. Sometimes I didn't feel like, sitting down and doing a lot of writing. And that's when I would do research. And back to what I looked at, since it's based in Australia, I've never been there. I don't know anything about Perth, Fremantle, Albany, these cities in Western Australia. And there's these great museum resources online. There's newspaper resources online. And there's these community groups that aren't even official groups. It's just like Fremantle back in the old days, and people share family photos. And then you see a store in the background, and it's like, oh, that's right across the street from the harbor. They're going to have a scene in there. Or, oh, there's this hotel. This was the place to stay when you were in town. So I'm going to set it there. And there's all these photos. It shows the layout, what the rooms look like, what the dining area looked like. And it was really fun to get very specific about many things, and just little things like, okay, Navy guy in Australia, what kind of cigarettes did he smoke? Because everybody smoked. And just like little things like that to make sure that it was as accurate as I could make it.
Between that and the dialogue in the book and some of the colorful language, and I mean, that really does make it feel lived in, and like you've been there and done all the research necessary. As far as future stories, have you already sort of started thinking about that, or would you want to stay in this area? What's kind of on the tip of your tongue?
I think this is really set up because I just started writing, and I was like, let's see what happens. I didn't think I had one novel in me when I finished chapter 1, because I was like, got to make, I don't know, they say at least 80,000 words. And I'm like, that's a lot of writing, but I'll just write for fun. Why don't I just do that? But this is really set up well to be a series. It could, the main character is quite young, so it could definitely go through World War II and to the nuclear Navy beyond that, where it's a very different kind of story. You get far more into geopolitics, and we're just having our subs hang off this coast to send a message to Moscow, who will send a message to Beijing. So it gets far more internal rather than external battles and things. But I think it's something just following someone's career progress and have setbacks, I think could be fun to explore. So that's what I'm looking at now.
Gotcha. When you think one of the reasons why I've always followed you over the years is that you're center right, you're sane, you're not tribal. I think when you kind of stake a position, it's something that I could trust, even if I don't agree with it. I think it's coming from a heartfelt place. I'm kind of curious. I guess in a way, sometimes you overlap a little bit with the pop culture realm. And, right now we've got more and more platforms emerging. I mean, the Daily Wire is really full steam ahead with Hollywood style content. The Blaze is dipping a toe into it. Angel Studios is here, which is not really ideological, but they say they're driven by, light, sort of making things brighter. What's your take on where that's heading right now? Is it fits and starts? Are you optimistic? Are you thinking it's David versus Goliath when it comes to Hollywood? What's any sort of just general thoughts on this progression?
I tend to be pessimistic about certain things. I'm very optimistic that we are at a turning point. I'm an old duffer, and I remember being a little kid, and every sci-fi movie in the first half of the 70s was ecological disaster, we're all going to die, nuclear war, we're all going to die, or just some random meteor hits and we're all going to die. Then what would I have been, 9 years old? This movie came around called Star Wars. And it
I haven't
was
heard of it.
fun.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, do some research. It's in the Wayback Machine. But it was fun. It was jokey. It was silly. It was adventure. It was good versus evil. And I think kind of when I was writing my book, it wasn't, hey, here's an agenda I'm going to set forth. But I didn't want the gritty anti-hero recovering from childhood trauma. It's just, okay, we've heard that story. I didn't want characters inserted to represent this group or that group. And that's why I went with self-publishing as well, because I looked at the top 5 publishers. I think in my stats, all the fiction books promoted on their front pages, 84% female, and many, if not most, were about the, my suffering journey as a quadriplegic bisexual diabetes sufferer through Burma and confronting the patriarchy. You're just like, okay, already. It's just, I don't want to lecture. I want to read. I want something that's interesting, that's entertaining, that's challenging, but it's also fun. I'm not, so many books. When I do read novels, I tend to read the very old novels because so many of them, it's like eating your vegetables. It's just like, okay, what am I going to be taught today, kind of a thing, instead of saying, look, we're all people, we're all trying to figure it out wherever you find yourself, and just seeing people trying to do the right thing in difficult circumstances. I just think people are ready for that. They're tired of the cynicism, even the detached irony, which the era I grew up in, really, the whole Gen X thing. But I think just people want honesty for a while, and good guys versus bad guys. Those stories have always been more compelling since the first stories, probably since the first cave paintings. So I think it's foolish for Hollywood to go all in on this agenda stuff when people just want to laugh. They want to see a funny movie. Maybe it's an R movie and it'll offend, 0.14% of the American public. That's okay. Don't come. Don't watch it. The rest of us just want to relax for a while.
Yeah, toward that topic, there were 2 articles very recently, one in the New York Times that shocked me. Another I just encountered I think, with the Telegraph, that talked about essentially describing the end of the woke era in storytelling. And I think people like yourself are kind of well situated to kind of jump into that. Do you think that's true, or do you think that Hollywood still can be conservative in its inability to kind of course correct or change? Because I feel like often Hollywood needs to learn a lesson a dozen times before they actually realize maybe this is the wrong idea.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will not want to, but everybody's been talking about since the election, the vibe shift. And you can just feel it. I'm sorry. Yeah. Jeff Bezos just dedicated $1 million to Trump's inauguration. Zuckerberg did that a week or 2 ago. That wouldn't have been done at all 4 years ago, 8 years ago. It just wouldn't happen. And I think reality is setting in, and you have had those successes like the Top Gun Maverick movie. I'm sorry, people in Hollywood, they want some money and they think, oh yeah, I'll give to this charity and I'll vote for this hack candidate. But when it comes to making money, they're like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And they might sell it as some, oh yeah, this will be woke, of course. This white male fighter pilot in World War II, he lost a leg there, there, I've checked that box. But they want to make money and they know what the people want if they will just get the ideology out of the way and do it. Another great example is Godzilla Minus One, or is that what it was called? Minus One, I think. Yeah. And we watched that, and it was a movie. It was compelling. It was interesting. It was different, and it cost them a very low amount of money, which they completely made back. I'm sorry, a lot of upstarts in Hollywood, the young generation of the rebels in the early 70s, Coppola and Milius and these kind of characters, they're looking at this and saying, okay, now's the time, boys, let's do it.
Yeah. It's also a lesson to Hollywood. If you can make a movie that looks that rich, that FX driven for 15 million or less, you guys are doing something wrong. Absolutely.
He's back on the catering for a while.
That's right. I think Hugh Jackman's chicken breast menu is more expensive than that movie. John, before I let you go, let's end on a positive note and maybe a constructive note. Obviously, I've known you for years and you've got the chops to write and write well. I mean, even given all that, I was really blown away by the prose in the book. It's just exceptional and rich and deep and funny, of course. Any advice to people who maybe have been nursing that inner novelist and have been putting it off forever? I mean, there's no better time. You mentioned self-publishing, all the things we have access to, but obviously the nuts and bolts are what matters most. What would you say to someone who's been itching to do this and just haven't done it yet?
Well, one thing I will say is I spent a lot of time from college on reading about the writing process, how the great writers do it, because I thought there was a formula. After reading 100 of these things, I found out, oh, everybody does it their own way. So I say, do what works for you, but put your rear in a seat and start writing. Even if you don't think it'll turn into anything, knock out 500 words, knock out 1,000 words, and have fun with it. Talk about a subject you like. Talk about something you think your friends would like or that you would like to read, and just roll with it and see where it takes you. That's kind of what I did with this. I just wrote that first chapter. I invented characters' names on the fly. They stayed with the entire editing process. I made up situations, and then I realized by chapter 20, ooh, I got to pay that off. I just thought of some dumb idea in chapter 1 without really planning anything out. So just get to it and start writing, and also start reading. One thing that's actually good, I did this very early with my political writing. Find a writer that you like and transcribe their article. Hold it up, put it next to your laptop and type it, because there'll be all these things you'll add in an and, or you'll add in a comma, and then find out that that writer did not do that. You're like, okay, why didn't they do that? That's something I did like in college still. And that taught me a lot about how writers actually write and why I like the styles of writing that I do.
Wow, that's a great tip. I would never thought of it. It's very analog, but it really does make sense.
Right.
When I was an art major, I used to imitate my favorite artists. And I think that was learning as I did that as well. Not just an homage, but something you actually kind of, work into your psyche. But John, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to me. The new book is Sink the Rising Sun, available right now. Find it at Amazon, get it on Kindle, whatever kind of format you'd like, or your favorite bookstore. And I'm excited. We'll be seeing more stories from you and maybe even more scripts along the way. I'd love to see you, that part of your career, maybe segue into this new media revolution. It's pretty exciting.
Definitely is. Well, thanks for having me on, Christian. Thanks for, you've been in the trenches for a long time, fighting the good fight with the whole entertainment and pop culture. So thanks for that. Everybody now should go out and rush out in a buying frenzy for the book. And that's all I ask. Millions and millions of sales.
It's a simple ask, but you get a good book. So
right.
It's a win-win. So thanks again, John.
Thank you.
Well, before we wrap things up, I wanted to mention Zachary Levi. Now, I think we've talked about him briefly before. The actor from Shazam and Chuck came out recently as a Trump supporter. Now,
he's the real deal. He's the real deal. And in a perfect world, and whatever that would look like, perhaps I would have voted for Bobby. But we don't live in a perfect world. In fact, we live in a very broken one. We live in a country that has been hijacked by a lot of people who want to take this place way off the cliff. And we're here to stop that, right? We're here to make sure that we are going to take back the steps.
Order. Now, again, that shouldn't be novel or noteworthy, but it is because he's a Hollywood actor. And as we've talked about a lot of times in the show, and necessarily, I must say, if you speak out in that fashion, you could get in trouble. You could have career repercussions. Or as Zachary Levi said it, this may be career suicide. Now, he recently appeared on Club Random, the great podcast with Bill Maher, and he told Bill that he really hasn't been canceled yet. He hasn't faced punishment or blowback or retribution for saying what he did. Bill Maher was very happy to hear that because while he's left of center and hates Trump, he doesn't want anyone to be canceled for their points of view. He's an old school liberal in the very best sense. Good on him. But what Bill Maher cautioned is that, hey, this ain't over yet. You may still face repercussions. You may still face some headwinds for saying what you did. That doesn't go over well in Hollywood, and a lot of people have the power over you to hire you, to fire you, to consider you for a particular project, or just skip your name and go on to the next person. So he said, I'm glad things have been going well for you, but just wait and see. But I want to mention another thing tied to Zachary that came out in Variety. Now, the publication recently published its worst of the year list, which I've done recently too at Hollywood in Toto. It's one of the best parts of the year for me. When you see a really bad movie, all you can do is say, I want to put it on that list because I can't wait for it. And I want to warn people to steer clear of this film. So I get it. It's just part of the movie going process, is what critics do. But what this particular critic did for Variety was not just blast one of Zachary Levi's films, he made it personal. The film in question is Harold and the Purple Crayon, and it was commercially a dud in the summertime. I don't think the reviews were very good as well. It's just not one of Zachary's best movies. I think we can be safe in saying that. But I want to read you specifically what this critic said about not just the movie, but Zachary Levi himself. Hang on. Instead, Sony repeats the tired idea, recycled by everything from Sonic to the Smurfs, of bringing cartoon characters into the real world, translating adorable Harold into allergic to the eyes Zachary Levi. Allergic to the eyes? Did he just insult an actor for his physical appearance? All right, first of all, Zachary Levi's a good-looking guy. I'd kill to look like Zachary Levi, okay? That's just silly. Second of all, what do his looks have to do with anything about his performance, about the movie? It is petty and it is wildly unprofessional. And you can't tell me that that comment coming out of the blue isn't related to what Zachary Levi said about Donald Trump. Well, he hasn't been canceled yet, but he has exposed at least one critic for being petty and vindictive and wildly unprofessional. So I guess there's that. So I just want to give a caution to Zachary and other conservative actors. I do hope you speak out. I do hope you speak out against things you disagree with. I think you can embrace certain ideologies. I think there's nothing wrong with that. The more people who do it, like Zachary Levi, the less pressure there is on others to do the same. Actors should be able to say whatever they want. This is America. And the fact that there's a new Hollywood blacklist against conservatives is just wrong. But let me tell you, while that blacklist is supported by people in Hollywood, studio executives, actors, directors, it's also supported by the media, the Hollywood media. They are part of that insidious machine. And you could see it in that review and in that comment. So good for Zachary Levi. Keep on speaking out. Keep on saying what you want. You know, you could argue that celebrities shouldn't take a side. I understand that, and I'm sympathetic to that as well. I think we showed with the recent election that it doesn't sway many hearts and minds, but he should be able to make that decision on his own terms and be able to speak his mind without professional blowback. Let's hope he doesn't face it. But for now, just a couple of signs that it could be coming next. Well, maybe in the Trump era, we'll see less and less of that and more freedom. As Justin Bateman famously said, I feel like I can breathe again. Let's hope that Zachary can breathe too, and other actors can be open to say what they want to say without repercussions. Well, that's it for the show this week. Again, my production schedule has been a little bit herky-jerky. That's my apology. Going through some personal stuff right now, which I hope I will never have to share with you. I hope things resolve in a way that are amicable and that life moves on in a way that's beneficial for everyone in my life. And if I do share it, it means that it didn't go well. So hopefully this will be the last you hear of it. But I do hope people are enjoying the holiday season. Get that shopping done. Spend time with your loved ones. Ignore those harpies on The View who are telling people not to hang out with relatives who don't vote the way they vote. That's nonsense. Give your friends and loved ones a hug, a kiss, put politics aside, have some turkey dinner, open presents, and have a wonderful holiday if I don't speak to you soon.